Hello, my name is Ricky Love, and I've been fly fishing for 20 years, and I've been tying flies for about 19 years. It's a great passion of mine, and I just love the ability for a tyer to have put their own personal artistic touch on each flies. You have your standard patterns, but I really like to experiment. Today we're going to tie two soft hackle flies, and if you ask me if I had one fly to tie, it's a damsel fly, and the name of it is a six-pack. It's a very popular fly in the Northwest, and if you fly fish in the Northwest, it's a must-have pattern in your box. In the 20 years that I have fished, this is the one pattern that I've caught absolutely the most fish on. So today we're going to use a Daiichi 1720. It's a 1X hook. You can tie them 2X and 3X, you know, for a longer nymph. And then the thread, we've got a uni thread, and this is a 8/0 olive thread, and just wrap that all the way back to the point of the hook. This pattern originated in 1965. You can tie it in olive, which is my preference, but I've tied them in tan, and I've also tied it in black. But a damsel fly is typically olive, and that's the color of thread I usually like. So for the tail, we're going to use, this is dyed olive pheasant tail. And so we'll take a good clump here for the tail and just cut it off. And then what I like to make the tail about half the size of the shank. So about right here. And then I'll hold it in place, and then I'll do 2 pinch wraps. One, crank it down, another pinch wrap, and then really tie it off and keep it down good. Some people like to just wrap the remaining pheasant tail. I like to cut it off. So next thing I'll use is some medium copper wire. You can also use gold. It's just a tyer's choice. I've used both. I prefer the copper. I think it goes well with this fly. And I'll tie this in on this side of the shank. So I'll move the thread up a little bit, and then I'll just tie it right along the shank on this side. And what that does, that just keeps it, when you start counter wrapping it, it keeps it out of the way so it doesn't mess with the tail. And then for the body, again, we're going to use the olive pheasant tail. And I'll use these longer fibers. The last thing you want to do is, as you're wrapping, is run short on the material. So I'll use the upper portion where it's pretty long. And I'll get about 8 to 10 clumps of the pheasant tail fiber, and then line those tips up. And the pheasant tail fibers, the tips are fairly brittle, so what I like to do is I just like to cut just so I have even tips there, and it gives me a nice place to really wrap. And I'll take the thread all the way up to just behind the eye, leaving enough space, and then I start wrapping the fibers forward. And you see it makes a nice uniform body. And then I'll just tie it off. And you really want to make sure you secure that pretty well. Again, pheasant tail fiber is something, as you see right there, that sometimes tries to come undone. So you really want to bind that down. Then I'll take my scissors, cut that, and then just secure that a little more. And we got a little stray hair right there. All right, so next thing I'll do is I'll take my wire, copper wire, and I'll wrap this counterclockwise, and this really binds down that pheasant tail. And as you fish it, it gives it a lot of durability because it really binds down the pheasant tail and doesn't make it come apart. So just wrap those, try to keep them evenly spaced. Again, get up right to about just behind the eye, and then just secure that. And what I like to use, I just have a cheap pair of scissors that I use, and when you cut, you really want to cut with this back portion of it. That doesn't dull your scissors. So I'll go in deep, cut it with the back. Then now we are ready for the soft hackle. So for the soft hackle, this is olive dyed pheasant rump. You just want to get a nice feather, and as you see, you have all this fluffy stuff. You want to take that all the fluff off. So that looks good. And then you can kind of size it as I look right here. What I don't want it to do is go behind the tail. And so that looks about right there. I'll cut that stem off just so I don't have to do it, but I'll leave a good portion of that stem on. You want to grab the tip of it and you want to stroke the feathers back. Because as you see when you tie that on, this just makes the feather go towards the rear of the fly. And then what I'll do is I'll just take my scissors, just cut that down a little bit. And then we're going to tie it in just right behind the eye. And this is the technique that you use for all soft hackles. Then what I'll do is you're going to wrap the soft hackle. If you want it less sparse, you can just do 1 or 2 turns. So all you're going to do is start turning, and you'll see that stem will start wrapping around. And as I turn, I'm going to start stroking those feathers back. And then I'll probably just take 1 more turn right there and just stroke. Then I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to secure that stem right there, maybe 1 more. And then I'll come in very carefully and cut that stem right there. So the next thing you're going to do now, you're going to just take your fingers and you're just going to stroke back and just get all this hackle back. And then once you got it secured back, you're just going to start building that head. And you're going to really start going backwards. Put 1 wrap right on top of the other as you're going back. And that'll really hold those the feathers back and give you that look that you want. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then I'll go ahead and whip finish. And I'll do about 5 wraps on the whip finish. Come in, cut that off. And anytime you're using this, the soft hackle, I like to put some head cement on. So I'll just put some on the top. That just really keeps, binds the feathers down and keep them intact. And that there is what we call a 6-pack. And again, I've caught more fish on that in my 20 years of fishing than any other fly. And it's an absolute must that you have to have. You really want to fish it by weed beds, have a slow sinking line, and I'll cast it towards the weeds, let it sink down. And then I experiment as far as with the strip, so you just kind of see what the fish like. And also fished it in the river, on the Umpqua River for smallmouth bass. Great pattern that is must have. Okay, so for the second fly, again, it's a soft hackle. And this one is an attractor pattern. It's called a guaranteed, and I can't guarantee it's going to work all the time. But I know over the last 20 years I've caught lots of fish with it. It's one that you definitely want to also have in your toolbox. So again, we're going to use a Daiichi 1730 hook. This is a size 10, and this is a 1X. You could use 2X, 3X. You can go anywhere from 8 to 10. I typically like to use a 10. For the thread, I'm going to use a uni-thread black 8/0. And so we'll go ahead and put that thread on the shank, and I'll take it right back to the tip. And then for the tail, what you want to use is duck feather. You could use teal, you could use mallard, you could also use grizzly hackle. But what you really want is that barbed look. You can see the dark with the white contrast of that feather, and that's what you want to use. So I'll stroke some of these to the side. Come in with the scissors, cut them, and then line those tips up. And again, I want the tail about half the length of the shank. Put it in place, and I'll get 2 pinch wraps, one down, and then a second, and then I will secure that in place. And that looks good, and I'll come in and I'll cut off the rest of that. So the next piece of this fly is an egg sac, and what you want to do is orange floss. I've also used red, and they both work equally, so whatever your preference is. So I'll go ahead and cut a piece of that. A lot of the flies today have hot spot, so I think this is one of the things that really attract fish, is this orange egg sac on the back of the fly. So you want to get that in and just make sure you get a good wrap and secure that. And then you just want to go ahead and wrap it around. You don't want to make it too long, so it's just a nice little egg sac in the back of the fly. And that's probably sufficient right there. We'll tie that off. And we'll go ahead and cut. Just make sure that's nice and secure. Okay, and for the body is peacock curl, and what you can see if you turn on the back side, you actually see the stems of the peacock curl. What I like to do is take about 3 strands, and I'll position so I can see those stems. And so what I'll do is I'll just come in and I'll cut right along. And so right now those stems are facing up. And so I want to make sure they are facing up, and then I'll come in and I'll cut at an angle, just like that. So those stems are facing up, and I'll go ahead and I'll tie those in with the stems facing up. And then I'll go ahead and secure them, tie it, and take it all the way up just behind the eye. Now the benefit of doing that is, and as I start wrapping, you can see the stems are going against the shank. And so now you're getting a nice even body. And I'll wrap that. One more. And then we'll tie that off. And make sure we secure that. Peacock curl is fairly brittle. With this technique, so you're finishing and tying off this herl before you get to the tips. And that'll help it be more secure. For the soft hackle, it is going to be this blue peacock feather. And again, we're going to take off all this fuzzy fur that we don't need. And again, we don't want it going too far back, so I'll gauge it right there. Go hold it by the tips. If you want a sparse fly, then you could simply turn it over and you can take off one side of hackle. I like more hackle, and so I tend to keep both on there. So again, with all soft hackle technique, I'll stroke that back, and then I'll come in here and cut that down a little bit, and that's where I will tie it. And this stuff is kind of brittle. And I'll come in here and just clean that head up before I do any wrap. Just make sure you don't cut your thread. All right, and then I'll take my hackle pliers and I'll grab the stem. And then just make some turns. Again, as you're turning, you want to stroke that back just to get those fibers going back. And I'll take one more turn, stroke. Bring the thread. Secure the stem. Carefully come in. Cut it off. Okay, again, I'll stroke everything back where it's looking good. And once I have everything back, then I'll build the head and start wrapping each thread as I move back one on top of another, and that will keep those feathers going back. Today I'm using this black thread. Sometimes I use red, and that works very well too. So once that's tied off, I'll come in and do a whip finish. And I'll do about 5. Cut it off, and on this, I always use head cement on this peacock feather. That just helps keep it in place, makes it more durable. As you fish soft hackle and you start catching lots of fish, that hackle tends to come apart, so this just makes it a little more durable. So this is the guarantee. Just a great attractor pattern. You could tie a red egg sac, and you can use orange, or you can use red thread, just depending on your flavor.
In the sunlight, the heather of hills and the rising morn, the rolling grassy mist grows east in the morning to run the wild hills of